Thank you for joining us for another episode of Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And each week, we normally answer your questions. We explore the history of the city together. But for this episode, we're doing something a little different, and we are calling it Ask Another Historian. And his local historian and author Dave Cook will be joining me to explore the 4 books that he has written and his passion for the history of the city of Mississauga. So this week on Ask a Historian, we have a special treat where I get to turn the tables and I get to ask another historian. Joining us this week is Dave Cook, author, historian, multiple term past counselor, decades apart in the latter case, and a former newspaper reporter. Dave, you've worn a lot of hats in your time, and of course I want to focus on the books and the history. But a little bit of early on, you were involved with newspapers and I believe radio as well. Can you tell us, just briefly walk us through your career, kind of the path that led you down to record stories?
Matthew, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on today. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun, and let's go back to when I first moved into Applewood Acres. My dad and mom, he was starting a farm in Malton. And he had an idea back in 1948, 49 that people might like chickens. So he was going to become a chicken farmer, and he bought land in Malton and started to build this big, huge chicken house and the whole bit. And the government came along and expropriated us to expand the airport. Bottom line of the story is our farm was located exactly, I checked the degrees, exactly on the stretch where the aircraft land on the north-east-west runway. Okay. And that was, so he moved to Applewood Acres. And then at that point, I was a teenager. And I got interested in automobiles, and I bought a sports car, and I joined a sports car club. And be darned if in 1960, I was asked by the Oakville Trafalgar Light Car Club if I would be the secretary of the meet of Mosport Park, the racetrack. Yep. Because our club, and along with 2 other clubs, started the track. We built it and started it, and I was the organizer of the very first car race at Mosport. And that led to a fairly interesting career in car racing, track announcing and this type of thing. And bottom line is, many years later, I ended up going back to motorsport, and I owned a race car for a while. I had a lot of fun with that. But my announcing at Mosport, and then that led to announcing at other tracks in the United States on the Can-Am Series circuit, Mid-Ohio, Watkins Glen, and so forth. That led to a career in radio. And I ended up working with Johnny Lombardi at his station in Toronto, and also at CHIC in Brampton. And from that led into the newspaper business and covering politics. I got fed up one day and I thought I could do better. And I threw my hat in the ring and I got elected. That was 1980. And I sat for 3 terms and then retired. And then what am I going to do now? I went back to car racing and I became the general manager of Mosport's second racetrack. And then when Harvey Hudis, the owner, he died, I stepped away and I said, that's it. And I started to think about other things. And being at the time, the president of the Homeowners Association, they asked me to write a little brochure on the 50th anniversary of Applewood Acres. It led to a 228-page book. Satellite dishes. And Terry Butt, a good friend of mine who used to be a counselor in this area, helped me with the publishing of the book, provided some money, and he bought 1,000 copies. And that gave me enough money, and with a little bit of the savings I had, to go ahead and publish it. So we published that book. That then led to another book, From Frozen Ponds to Beehive Glory, the history of Dixie Arena and the Dixie Beehives. And then that led to 2 more books, Fading History Volume 1, Fading History Volume 2. There we go.
I'm being the show person here.
Those 2 are the only 2 left in print. I have a few copies. I got about 500 copies of each left. And after that, I don't know what I'm going to do. But I have been doing, since 2004, every weekend, I've been doing book sales, selling books. And that led to combining things I write about. I met an artist who painted the Avro Arrow, which I write about, and the Lancaster Bomber. So I started to sell his paintings, and then we put he did paintings on coffee mugs, so you know. So I had to. So at these book sales, I was selling all of these things. You know, the coffee mugs. I've got a beautiful mug here, the Lancaster Bomber. It's a stainless steel mug.
Okay.
And so at these events, I would sell my books, and people would buy coffee mugs and paintings and so forth. So it's been a lot of fun. Yeah. So that's the history of it, of my 5 careers.
You were, I wanted to highlight, I mean, you've had, coming into, you're publishing your books and the story behind the first one. I mean, you get the ball rolling with Terry and the book on apple blossoms and satellite dishes. You were recognized for this. You showed me a plaque. Do you want to tell us about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, the very interesting. I've got it here. I was showing it to you, and it's signed by Tim Peterson, who was the MPP of Mississauga South at the time. And Tim invited Terry Butt and myself to attend the legislature in Ontario, and he stood up in the legislature and he recognized Terry and myself. And in his script here, he tells about my writing the book and so forth. You know,
I just think
actually 4 times in the legislature.
Nice. So your the books themselves, and we could talk for hours on being a counselor and the stories therein, and maybe that's another episode where we can talk about the other side. I'm sure they inspired some of your stories. You
know, Matthew, being a counselor opens the door to meeting many people, and definitely. I won't say that had I not been a counselor, I wouldn't have been able to write these books, but it would have been more difficult because the people over the course of the last 40 years that I've been around politics and this sort of stuff, I've got to meet a lot of people, and I keep the phone numbers, you know, so I've got a long list of phone numbers, and it was very easy to call somebody up, like the pallets as an example, because I wrote about the pallets in one of my books.
Yeah.
You know, actually in apple blossom satellite dishes. The house on Dixie Road, just south of the Queen Elizabeth, south of Dixie Mall, and there's an apartment building there, but the house there was originally done by the Pallets. And so, you know, like I picked up the phone and called one of the Pallets, you know, and I got the information right away. So it was interesting.
So before we go into the books a little bit, I do, I mean, I honestly don't know if I've heard another parallel where you retire from being a counselor in 1988, and you go on into other endeavors, and then you know, with the sad passing of Councillor Jim Tubby, council knocks on your door and asks you to do it again, and we're looking. I'm really bad with math, Dave, but 25 years later, 30. There we go. So 30 years after retirement, you're brought back out of retirement.
I've got to tell you, when I got the phone call at 7 in the morning, in February, it's from Carolyn Parrish.
Yeah.
Dave, she said, I'm calling to give you some sad news. Jim Tobey passed away last night, on the way home from a planning committee meeting. And I said, whoa. So then I said, I'm sorry to hear about that. And I said, Carolyn, 7 in the morning, you're calling me? She said, yes. She said, we've discussed it all night on the phone. And a number of us would like to see you come back and fill in for the interim till the end of the term. See, the city is faced with, what happens is, by law, the city is faced with either a by-election or an appointment.
Right.
And the by-election, because this came at a time in the last term of, it was then an election year. So to have a by-election in an election year, and then a few months later, an election, is just a waste of taxpayers' money. So what they do, they advertise it, and people can come forward and apply. And there was 19 of us that came forward. And I said to Councillor Parrish, I said, yes, I'll, on an interim, I will come forward and make a presentation, and which I did, and I was selected, and I was very, very honored. So
it must have, just the way the world revolves a bit. It must have been deja vu yet new again.
Matthew, I want to tell you, I'm sitting in the audience. There was at the council chambers at the time. It was 1 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, and I'm sitting with a friend of mine, John Walmark, and his wife Pam, and we were, they were pleased to come along with me. And then when the council announced the winner, I went, ooh. I said, John, I'll catch you later. And I got up and I went forward, and then I knew what the process was. I had to read a proclamation, a declaration, that type of thing. And then I got up, took my seat, and I sat there. And you know something, Matthew? 30 years after I retired, it just felt like I'd been away on my summer vacation and I came back. I just felt comfortable. At the end of that meeting, we went upstairs. They asked me if I knew where the office was. I said, yes, I know exactly where it is. And I went down to it, and I introduced myself to Lynn Judge, who was the executive assistant, and the other staff that was there. And I said, please stay on. I have no intention of replacing anybody. Yeah. And that night, I had my agenda. She had my agenda ready for meetings that night, and the next morning, the whole bit. And it was just like I'd been away for, a holiday, and I'm back at work. And it was 30 years had gone by. Incredible.
You talk about you hit the ground running. There's no learning curve. You're thrown into the fire.
Yeah.
Well, now, a step back. At this point, I mean, you've just come off your fourth term on council. But in between those terms, those 30 years in between, you produced the 4 books. And I keep thinking that there's a volume 3 coming, but maybe we can talk about that at the end. Maybe it's all the council stories or something. But back to the very first one. In 2002, you produced, sorry, is it 2002 or 2004? It's 2004.
Yeah, I started writing it in 2000. It took 4 years to get it together.
Yeah. 2004, you produced Apple Blossoms and Satellite Dishes, the story of Applewood Acres. Right. And I mean, I think one of the fascinating things about this is we hear lots of, we have and lots of things published on Streetsville and Port Credit and Arundel and Malton and stuff, but we don't have a lot on that next wave of subdivision development, whether it be something like Park Royal or, we can look at any number of them, Park Royal, Hiawatha on the Lake, the Credit Grove, but Applewood really is a defining moment in Mississauga's evolution. It predates the city, but it really sets the course, in a sense, for what the city will become. What makes Applewood special to you? I mean, you live there. I mean, there's going to be a biased answer, I suppose.
Applewood Acres, when you live here and you start to I guess because I was president of the Homeowners Association and because I had been elected on council, I got to meet a lot of people in Applewood, and I got to hear a lot of stories about former people in Applewood. Now let's go back. If you look through that book, Apple Blossoms and Satellite Dishes, there's one chapter on a list of very famous people. Yep. That were in Applewood Acres. And I thought that's fascinating. But let's go back a little bit before the famous people. Applewood Acres was established as the very first subdivision built by a family developer, the Ship family, west of Toronto. And it also, in fact, Harold Ship told me, and he showed me the documents, his father was the president of the Home Builders Association of Canada. And Applewood Acres, the 1,200 homes that were built here, ended up becoming, and still today is, the largest subdivision built in North America by what they call a family developer. Not companies, but a family developer, the Ship. And that in itself is very impressive. And that sort of kicked off Mississauga's growth. People in Toronto started to look out toward this area for homes when they wanted to move out. And the funny story here is in Applewood Acres, Harold Ship told me, he said when the family went to the bank to borrow the money, the bank manager said, we're not going to give you a penny unless you guarantee that you build garages attached to every house. Because he looked at the plans and he said, there's no garages. Why? And Harold Shipp said, well, we don't need garages. People can park and, you know. He said, no. He said, people are going to drive from Toronto, work in Toronto and drive back and forth, and they need a garage to park their car in. You guarantee garages, I guarantee you the loan. And that's what happened. The loan, and he built Applewood Acres. It's kind of interesting.
And what was there truth? I've heard the legend of advertising the houses in Applewoods with apple trees and cars on the roofs.
Yes, there was one situation where Harold Shipp did that and put a car in there. Yeah, but apple trees. Of course, Applewood Acres was an apple orchard, and every home in Applewood Acres had an apple tree in its backyard. Every home. Years, a lot of them, most of them have been cut down. You know, we still have a little one out back.
Yeah. Well, and also, if you look at there's a street map around Applewood Plaza, particularly, where a number of the streets are named after different types of apples and things like that.
Oh, yes, most of the streets in Applewood are named after apples. And there's a funny story about, God bless Gordon Shipp, he passed away, and so did his son Harold. But there's a street called Jonathan, and I said to I said to Harold one day, I said, how come it's spelt that way? And he said, well, it's spelled different. He said, Dad didn't know how to spell Jonathan, so he spelled it incorrectly. So.
I was gonna say your son is Jonathan. Did that have any inspiration?
No, because in my family, my grandfather was John.
Okay.
And in our family, we tend to try. We haven't done it with my grandson, but try to keep some of the family names. You know.
How you mentioned, and I was actually going to segue into it, but you already mentioned it. It was the chapter on the famous people and that live there. And I don't want to steal too much of the thunder. The one that always comes to mind, of course, you know, wears the white suit and sells chicken. But what are some of the people that have connected with Applewood Acres over the years, and that you mentioned in your book?
I don't have my book with me.
I do.
Look at that, you'll see there's some hockey players. Oh gosh, you know, we're going back now. My memory is gone. Well, how many years ago did I write that book? The most famous of them all. And there was a couple of others, very, very influential people.
Yeah. No, I just and I should apologize to our listeners as well. We didn't really prep for interviewing. I'm surprising you with some of the questions we're asking. Yeah. So this is the nature of the virtual world now. But you have one here. Was you know, Applewood in its development is very much connected to that commuter subdivision of, you know, the QEW and into Toronto and the like, and of course that early plaza, the Applewood Plaza, becomes kind of the cornerstone of the commercial aspect of that community. I mean, I think what's hard to appreciate about Applewood was it began prior to all of the amenities that we kind of take for granted in our municipality today. I mean, Square One wasn't there. You like the shopping, that was the shopping center, the Applewood Plaza for that community. I mean, it is unique when you think you go back into, you know, the late 40s and early 50s when these concepts are being developed.
I can't honestly remember whether Applewood Acres Shopping Center was the second or third shopping center ever built.
Yeah.
I believe it wasn't the first. And Dixie wasn't the first either, Dixie Mall. But I believe there's one in Clarkson that was the first, I think.
Yeah.
Then Applewood, and then Dixie.
And just early stages. I mean, this is the development of what would become our city. And we see it. And it's neat, though, that, I mean, Applewood Plaza is still there. Its facelift has changed a little bit over time, but...
You know, I'll tell you a funny story that I haven't told anybody. It's just something that passes through my mind virtually every time I drive along the Queen Elizabeth to come home. And I pass Dixie Mall and I'm approaching Cawthron. And it always goes through my mind how funny the little story that tens of millions of people that have passed by this road where I am, how many would have realized that at Dixie Mall, and I write about it in one of my volume books about Dixie Mall and the music fair. There was a theater that sat 2,000 people in a tent. And the very first production in that theater with the stars from Hollywood was about Buffalo Bill Cody. And Buffalo Bill Cody, I'm sure everybody remembers Buffalo Bill Cody, but his father was born in what is now Applewood Acres. The Cody family lived right here. They owned the property right here in the western part of Applewood Acres. And I often think, you know, the irony there that the very first major Hollywood production at Dixie Mall was about a man who was born, his father was born here, and nobody knew it. You know?
It really, I remember, honestly, I remember investigating this with you many years ago now, and was trying to confirm those connections. And yes, I mean, you're right, the Cody family was here. I mean, but there was an article that we located in, I believe it was the Toronto Star, that covered a very early visit of the Wild West show to Toronto. And he refers to visiting his family here in Canada. So he still had Buffalo Bill, born in the United States, to from for a short period of time the Canadian roots to his family. Was mentioning this in his visit. I don't have the date in front of me. I want to say it's in the 1890s, but I don't have the exact date. Where, you know, there was still family here, and he was aware of that family. He came to visit them. So yes, Buffalo Bill Cody came to Mississauga. So
his aunt, I think this is how it works now. His father, Isaac, was born here, and his Isaac's sister, when Philip Cody moved back to the States, he took Isaac with him, but the daughter stayed here. Mm-hmm. And I believe she ended up living in the Clarkson, you know, the development there. Yeah,
she married a Marigold from the Clarkson area.
Yes, yeah.
So,
well, that was
family. It's just fascinating layers of history. It really is. You peel them back, and but the music tent is a fabulous one, and we can get to that when we talk to your book. So let's segue into your second book, because honestly, it's near and dear to my heart. And for somebody who never watched them play, and never visited the Dixie Arena in my lifetime, I'm fascinated by it. And that is From Frozen Ponds to Beehive Glory, and the story of the Dixie Beehives hockey team. And I think, you know, if there's something that goes into legendary status in a sense, I'd say the Dixie Beehives are kind of one of those things that have really been a cornerstone to the identity of historic Mississauga. Maybe the current generation doesn't attach to them as much, but historically, the Dixie Beehives were quite an operation and quite well known beyond our borders. How did you get into that one? I mean, this is a step away from Applewood. How did you get into Dixie Beehives?
When I was doing the book on Applewood Acres, doing the research, a couple of times there were involvements of the Dixie Arena, because the people here, and I was one of them, we used to go to the Dixie Arena to skate, public skating, on a Friday night and then on a Sunday and this type of thing. And when the Applewood book was finished, I didn't have enough room to do another chapter on the Dixie Arena. And I started to think, boy, you know, there was more to the public skating than that. So I started to research the history of Dixie Arena, and that led to that book.
Now, some of the things, I mean, we could talk for ages on Dixie Arena. At least I could. I'm fascinated by it. But I mean, the creation of the arena, our first indoor ice rink.
First,
but the team itself, I mean, stand fields and pallets and.
Well, the pallets, of course, I'll tell you about that, but it was the first hockey arena built west of Toronto with artificial ice. And the pallets, what happened was there was a group of businessmen in Cookstown. And this is, of course, going back into the 40s and that. And they wanted to build a hockey arena because all the skating was on frozen ponds, you know, the Arundel Dam as an example.
Yep.
And so let's build a skating arena, hockey arena. And okay, let's do it. So anyway, every meeting they discussed it, but nothing ever happened. And one of the pallets, who was a member of that group, got fed up, and he said, "To heck with it," and he took it on himself, and he organized a group, and they met at the intersection of Dixie Road and Dundas. There used to be on the northeast corner. There used to be a service station.
Okay.
And that's where the mafia met. And the mafia, they were called the mafia because all of the people that met wore black hats and black coats. So all of the Dixie businessmen met there, and Pallet was the leader. And it was Pallets and the Stanfields that got this thing going. And they raised the money, and they built a hockey arena. And after and there's a chapter in that book too. After they built the hockey arena, Pallet said, okay, we built something for the kids. What are we going to build for us? They built the Dixie Curling Club, which,
okay.
Yeah.
What was that? What was the last part you said about the club, the Dixie Curling Club?
The Dixie Curling Club.
Yeah.
That was built by the same group, and it still stands.
Still stands. I mean, maybe I keep thinking of new books. Maybe that's the next one.
Let me tell you, I hate to admit it, but okay, it takes as a publisher, self-publisher. I'm an author, publisher, but you're really a book salesman, because if you can't sell the books, you can't publish. You pay for it. And it takes me about roughly 2.5 to 3 years to do research. And it takes me about 8 to 10 years to sell the books at these book shows that I do.
Yeah.
Almost 80 years old. You think I want to be 90 doing all this? No way.
Well, maybe in the era of ebooks instead, maybe we could look at the electronic book. So I mean, those are fascinating stories, and I know those first two are out of print, and they are available through the library system, of course, and but well worth a read. And Applewood is a specific area in our city that is unique and is early in terms of subdivision development. But then really the story of Dixie Arena Gardens and the Dixie Beehives hockey team, or formerly the Dixie Staffords. You're the one who told me about that. I didn't know anything about the Staffords name.
Hot chocolate, that's right.
Yeah.
And the picture in that book about Stafford sitting in the back seat of the Cadillac. Stafford's hot chocolate actually were the first hockey team at Dixie Arena. It lasted one season. And then it became the Dixie Beehives, because the St. Lawrence Starch Company in Port Credit took over the sponsorship, but named it Beehive, because it had the Beehive sponsor. So it became the Dixie Beehives. And that team, by the way, Matthew, put 48 players into the NHL.
I'd read about that, and I marveled at it. And again, you think of those things where they go beyond our borders, because the league they were playing in. I mean, this team traveled and was well regarded and well known, and had a good home ice advantage when they came home to play in Dixie, and a beloved team and a beloved arena at the time. So just a remarkable story. It really is. And it's unfortunate that the arena itself is no longer with us. It's I remember when the arena came down, and I was always disappointed to see it go. I know it was an old building at that point, but still, it was rather iconic.
It was sad, because now you take the new arena that the city of Mississauga owns on the 403, changed the name of it, but that was built. What happened was Dixie Arena had to be torn down, and the Pallets and the Stanfields approached the city and asked to help with some funding to build a new arena. And the bottom line was another company came in, made a better offer, and there you have the arena up on 403, or 410, I guess.
Yeah, it's because formerly the Hershey Center, now the Paramount Fine Foods Center. I mean, you look at descendancy in a sense, and the Dixie Arena Gardens was the ancestor of that. And we also look, I mean, we have other old arenas, Port Credit Memorial Arena and the Paul Coffey Arena now up in Malton. I mean, these are old rice surfaces as well, but the grandfather of them all was Dixie Gardens Arena. And,
that's right. And then Streetsville came right after that, and then Port Credit.
Yeah.
Of course, later Paul Coffey.
That's remarkable. So, segueing in from that one, the Frozen Ponds to Beehive Glory, that was your second book, and that was 2006. And then in 2008, you produced Fading History Volume 1. when you look at this book, sorry, I'm struggling with, when you look at this book, you certainly have an aviation interest that comes through in the book.
Mississauga's got an aviation interest.
What was that, sir?
Mississauga. It's all Mississauga.
Yes, yes. So what inspired you to create the Fading History Volume 1? I mean, you obviously, at that point, I'm assuming you got the idea that there's going to be a Volume 2.
I wasn't sure if there would be, but I figured, what the heck, we'll name it Volume 1, because if there's no Volume 2, no, what prompted me to write this was incredible. And there's a total of about 15 or 16 different stories in Volume 1. And every story basically somehow touched my family or some portion of my life, And I thought, why not write about them? For instance, Malton. I grew up in Malton. And the school I went to as a child in 1948, I went to a school called the Elmbank Public School. Now, the Elmbank Public School, if anybody says, where was that? The best way to describe its location is, do you know where the Peterson control tower is? Well, that's where the Elmbank School was. Having grown up in Malton, so much happened up there. And my brother actually, he's 5 years older than me. He ended up working on the Avro Arrow. He was a test technician in the Iroquois division, the engine division. And I thought, the Avro Arrow, that's a tremendous story. It's so filled with myths and the whole thing. I should write about what the aircraft was. I won't get political, so I did that. And to write about the Avro Arrow, you have to write, first of all, about the Lancaster bomber, because during World War II, Canada was asked to help England in a very different way. One was, would you build some aircraft, because you're not going to be bombed over there. Our plants are being bombed here. So we ended up building 420 Lancaster bombers and flew them to England into the war. Right after the war, that company was so impressed that they were so impressed. Hawker Siddeley said, great company, great product you built. They came over and bought the assets and created AV Canada. AV A.V. was an engineer in England, and he had an aircraft company. It later on became Avro. And they built the CF-100, the C-102, and so forth, but they built the CF-105, the Avro Arrow. They also built a flying saucer. And I've got all that in the book. I thought, so much took place up there. I got to write about those. So there's about 6 chapters involving Malton during the war, the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, number 1 was there, and so forth. So yeah.
Out of those stories, I mean, the Avro Arrow is an obvious one, but was there any that really surprised you in the gathering of it? I mean, the flying saucer to me is just a remarkable, if odd, short-lived story. But it's any that jump out at you in the process of gathering?
I don't think I was surprised. I became well informed about some of the things that I knew about, but I didn't know the whole story in the research. As an example, the flying saucer. Now, the flying saucer was hush-hush. Nobody knew about it, except the farmers who lived on the 6th line where I lived. Because to do the what they call wind testing of the flying saucer, they had to take it to the States. And they would load it on a truck. I got a picture in the book of them loading this thing, the flying saucer, on the back of a truck. And they would drive on the 6th line at midnight and knock off all of the mailboxes as they went down. And the next day or day after, we'd get a knock on the door, and it'd be a federal government man saying, sorry, but we had a little accident outside, and here's a check to pay for your new mailbox. And they wouldn't tell us what happened. But as a child, riding my bicycle from the 6th line up to Malton Public School, because I went from Elmbank to Malton Public School, I would pass the area, the hangar, where they were testing the flying saucer. And you could see the damn thing. You could see it floating in the air, 8 feet in the air. So we all knew about the flying saucer.
A top secret that wasn't quite secret. Now, I remember you, I didn't know much about the Commonwealth Air Training Plan and but the air crash that took place over the Workers' Compensation Board Hospital.
Yeah.
You introduced me to that one as well, and so I just I didn't prep this question, so I mean, I'm going out from a shot in the dark here, but I mean there's some fascinating stories here that really are quite unique to this area, and
well, you know, that is one story that did surprise me. I knew that an airplane had crashed because right at the intersection of Elm Bank and 6th Line, there was a little corner store, a grocery store. And we used to, on the way home, we used to stop in there, and for 2 or 3 cents, you could get some candy, you know. And a guy named McGregor owned the store. And we had heard about an airplane that had crashed directly outside on the other side of the road from that store, but we didn't know too much about it. But during when I started to do the research, I started to find out the whole story about what happened with that crash. 3 airplanes collided over the Workmen's Compensation Hospital, where I was the paper boy at the time. Not at the time of the crash, but I was the paper boy at that hospital. And 3 airplanes practicing for the very first Toronto Air Show. And these were the RCAF doing tours across Canada doing air shows. And the very first air show at Toronto was with this group. And the 3 aircraft collided in the midair and went down. And 2 of them were killed and the other escaped. He parachuted out. And so I started to do the research in the newspaper, and I started to get all these stories. And there was one name that stuck in the back of my mind. And I thought, gosh, you know, I wonder. So I looked in the phone book, and there were 3 people with that name. One was in Oakville, so I called the Oakville number. And the lady there said, no, that's my brother. He lives over on Dixie Road in the apartment building there. I said, oh. So I got his phone number, phoned him, and he said, come on over. And he was one of the pilots.
wow.
And my wife went with me and took the picture of me sitting with him. It's in the book. And he was one of the pilots, and he told me the whole story about what happened. And he also told me about, you know, his name was Joseph McBrien. And Joseph told me about, if you look in the book, there's a picture on page 184 of a woman. You can see it here.
Yep.
See? That's not a woman. That's one of the pilots that was killed in that crash. And he told me the story about what happened was his sister, before he went off to war, his sister said, let's have some fun. Let's dress you up like a woman and enter the Miss Toronto beauty pageant and see what happens. And became a finalist before they discovered it was a man. And I got that picture there.
Now, forgive me, I'm going from my memory, and I didn't prep myself greatly. I can see the picture there with you and Joseph McBrien. There was a connection to one of the pilots that was killed. Watson, was he not the older brother of someone well known? I'm trying to remember. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me. I'm just looking at the book here. But the stories are remarkable. I mean, you've got the pictures of it, the knowledge of it. I mean, this is a moment that really captured the news at the time and happened right here in Mississauga. So,
Yeah.
it's remarkable.
The crash took place above the Workmen's Compensation Hospital is where Terminal 1 is, just north of where Terminal 1 is now. And that was the original British Commonwealth Air Training Plan base number 1. And then after the war, the Workmen's Compensation Board at the time had a hospital idea for a hospital, and that's where they built their first hospital.
Right.
And, so that's where so you had the Malton Airport, and that's where the aircraft were landing and stored for the air show. So they were practicing above that hospital. So that's how that took place.
And they're fascinating stories, but then in a way, although you still, of course, you've got a little bit of the of aviation in the second book, but in 2010 you come out with Fading History Volume 2. And I will say, for me, you introduced me to a lot more stories of things that I had no idea about. Absolutely fascinating, particularly Aubrey Pope from Streetsville and the Browns and tennis. And Honestly, FDR's trips to Manitoulin Island make it into this book. Tell us about gathering the stories for this, because it is a little bit different flavor than Volume 1 was.
Yes, it is. This has in this book I did about 10 main stories, and I had one chapter with historic gems, short little stories.
Yeah.
But what started me off on this one was there was a girl, a friend of mine by the name of Paul Feast. We used to hang around together. He went to T.L. Kennedy when I went to Gordon Graydon, and he had a girlfriend. And his girlfriend, nobody could pronounce her name, but it was Xenia. And Xenia Kuvlaklosky. She was a Russian girl, and she lived with her grandmother. And Paul dated this girl. And the grandmother lived on Camilla Road. And nobody sort of paid too much attention. She was an old lady with, and she didn't dress properly. I mean, she had an old skirt on and rubber boots all the time. She never dressed up. But the story goes, if you want to be intrigued, her father, this lady's father, when this lady was born, her father controlled or owned, whatever you want to say, half of the world. He was Alexander, the Tsar of Russia, the Romanovs. And his daughter, Olga, ended up living in Cooksville. And the granddaughter lived with her and went to T.L. Kennedy School. So that was an intriguing story.
The Last Grand Duchess, and it really is a true story. And there are other books written about life and times of the end of the Romanovs, and the Grand Duchess makes it into those stories. But you are a really local flair here of attaching kind of on the ground, if you will, and the T.L. Kennedy connections. And I know the Hancock family were just up the road from
the Hancocks. No, he told me that I went over and saw his wife one day, and he had started to get dementia. And he told me a story, and his wife nodded, and she said, sometimes he remembers everything. And he was a friend of Olga's. Yeah. And he told me about his wife taking Olga down to Toronto. First of all, go over to Dixie Mall to buy some good clothes. And then to Toronto, because she was going to have lunch with her cousin, Queen Elizabeth II, who arrived on the Britannica yacht. So an incredible story.
Incredible story. And but some of your other ones as well. I'm fascinated by Aubrey Pope. I know I've already said that, but I think maybe FDR's secret trip, and I know it's not he passed through this place. But how did you uncover those stories?
Well, my wife and I actually, one time we went on a little vacation, and we ended up in Manitoulin Island. And I'm a great history buff, as you know. And there's a museum up there. And so I said to Sophie, I said, why don't we go to the museum? So we went in, and I'm looking at this wrecked aircraft, an old airplane. And it was wrecked. And all that was left, I think I've got a picture in the book, all that was left was basically the front portion of the aircraft. And then there was the story about what this aircraft was. And the short story of the long story is that Franklin D. Roosevelt, before they entered World War II, he used to go to Manitoulin Island a lot because he loved it. He took the war cabinet by train all the way through Hamilton, Oakville, Mississauga, Weston, Toronto, all the way up Barrie, the whole bit, to Manitoulin Island, and spent a week up there on Birch Island, which is right near Manitoulin, to discuss what they're going to do the next week at the Quebec conference. And I thought, what a fascinating story this is. He passed through Mississauga, why not tell a story that very few people do. There's a historic plaque up there talking about Roosevelt out on Birch Island, the whole bit, and the aircraft in the museum. And they made a big deal about it. So, hey, why not?
Absolutely.
So why not?
You also touch on, I always say you can't kind of shake a stick in Mississauga and not connect with a Kennedy in some way. You talk about the Kennedys in Mississauga and really kind of one of the prominent families that, created an identity in this place. And the Kennedys, of course, through extensions even into the Chudley family, are still very much active in their communities today. And but also, and aside from that, connecting to the Dixie community, though, is the Bethesda concert series, and just fascinating elements of our local history that you've captured here. And how did you decide what to write about?
Well, it was just I've made a list of things that were in my mind.
Okay.
And the Kennedys, well, why not write about T.L. Kennedy? I mean, and I knew Harold Kennedy really well.
Yeah.
Harold and I were best friends, and he was the nephew of T.L. Kennedy, and so why not write about him? And then I found out, and what really intrigued me was there was a lady who wrote a book about being hit by lightning twice, and two of the Kennedy kids were killed by lightning. And this lady wrote the book, and I contacted her, and she told me the whole story about Harold's mother. And I write about that in there, how she started a radio program,
yes,
called The Kennedy Kids. And it was just incredible. So that's in the book, and it's still, the book is still there.
No, it's remarkable, and so I mean, maybe we can come to a wrap on this. And two of the books are still in print. The volume 1 and volume 2, and maybe it's a shameless sales on my job, but well worth the read. I mean, these stories will really open up readers' eyes to the amazing chapters of the story of Mississauga. There's significant contributions to understanding what Mississauga is, Dave. I have to compliment you on those. In order to get in touch, to purchase books, we'll post your email address at the end, and they can get in touch with you directly.
Yeah. That'd be the best way. If you send me an email with your phone number, I can call you back, and then we can discuss how by the way, if you live in Mississauga, I will deliver the books, no charge. If you live outside of Mississauga, there's going to have to be a $10 charge for mailing.
Well, and it's not maybe a bad segue or not, but we're just before Christmas, and someone might be looking for a neat little story to read. And honestly, those two books, they are, the way that they're written. I mean, you can have a story, and a chapter is a story, and really a fascinating way of looking at the multifaceted connections in the city of Mississauga. And I always say you've scratched the surface, and maybe I understand the writing and the process of everything, but I'd long for volume 3 if you ever get it.
Might happen. But what I wanted to just mention something about the volume 2, and one of the short stories is the man who designed the space shuttle was from here. I mean, John Sanford was an aero engineer.
Yep.
And he lived in the area. And then when the layoff came, he went south and joined Rockwell International as an engineer, headed up their project, went to the US Senate to get funding for this program, which was the space shuttle, and ended up doing the whole thing. When he retired, he wanted to come back home. Rockwell owned a company in Port Credit called Admiral. Remember Admiral?
Admiral TV, yeah.
TV and that. So he came back as president of that. So,
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I knew John, actually.
It's amazing when you think, I mean, we live in Mississauga, and I'm a lifelong resident, and you've been a lifelong resident longer than I have. And it's fascinating to think of the stories that have happened here. I think in some ways, collectively, we haven't done a great job of, thinking of Mississauga as a singular identity, and sometimes we get overshadowed. But I think you've done an amazing contribution to the concept that Mississauga is a fascinating place.
Well, thank you. There's so many other things, as you know, the Grzynkos, this type of thing. Igor Grzynkov, the man who always wore the mask,
Yep.
He lived in Mississauga, and his kids went to T.L. Kennedy School. So there's many other stories out there.
Yeah.
I might volume 3.
We'll talk about an ebook. Maybe we can get rid of the actual publishing. Maybe we do they're hard to sell at book sales, mind you, but
I'm looking forward to this virus being ended and we can get back to my book sales, because I used to do, and I'm not exaggerating, I've got the documents to prove it. I have done over 1,200 book signings. Okay. I used to do 2 a weekend, every weekend, year, doing book signings. I would go to Woodstock about 15 times a year for nostalgia show, collectible shows, model railroad shows, gun shows, and so forth. Because I write about a lot of things that would fit into these shows.
Yeah.
I'd buy a table and I, and then I would sell my coffee mugs with the Avro Arrow and the Lancaster Bomber and so forth, But I want to get back to that.
I want to get back to it too, and to be honest, I want to get back to my Avro Arrow mug because it's proudly sitting on my desk at work. And so that's But Dave, thank you very much for doing this. I wish you all the best of the holiday season. I know it's not a typical year as we normally have, but stay healthy, stay well, and really appreciate you spending some time with us here on Ask a Historian, or in this case, Ask Another Historian, and exploring your books with us, because I'm thankful from this historian's perspective that you took the time to write things down. A lot of people miss that step.
Well, Matthew, thank you very much for inviting me on. I wish you well for the holiday season and stay safe. I've appreciated today, and you will get people my email address.
Yeah, we'll run your email address at the end, and they can get in touch with you, and hopefully you will.
And I can deliver them. I can wrap them up and leave them on the doorstep. Not a problem. I wear a mask.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, Dave. I really, really appreciate it, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you for spending some time with us here on Ask a Historian. It's been a fun wander down memory lane with author and historian Dave Cook and the exploration of the 4 books he's written on the history of the city of Mississauga. We look forward to seeing you on future episodes of Ask a Historian. Keep your questions coming.